The galactic consensus hadn't changed its laws in over 9,000 years, not because they were perfect, but because no one had ever dared. It was a council of ancient minds, some literally petrified in crystalline matrices, others evolved into clouds of sentient mathematics. They did not act quickly, they did not act brashly, and above all, they did not lose control. Then came the human, singular, definite article. Capital H, a biological species with no unifying command structure, no stable temperament, no consistent behavior, and barely any observable logic. And it took just one of them to fracture the consensus like a plasma torpedo through a hull made of bureaucracy. That human's name was Vince Drake, not Commander Drake, not ambassador, not strategist, just Vince. A middle-ranked officer in a laughably new entrant to galactic civilization, representing a species the consensus had rated a Class 4C flammable curiosity. You know, the kind you admire from behind a reinforced observation dome. He was thrown into the no-win scenario by accident, or so they claimed. The no-win scenario, officially titled Protocol for Strategic Disqualification of Non-Cooperative Entities, was a simulation designed by the consensus to test loyalty, compliance, and adaptability. The test was rigged. The subject is presented with two choices, both ensuring failure. It was meant to reinforce hierarchy and produce humility. Species that passed it were the ones who gracefully lost. Vince didn't know that. Or worse, maybe he did. The scenario began in the standard testing chamber 117 Gamma, orbiting the dormant star of Zelforeth, which the Gloon called the Shushing Light. Gloon, being tentacled arbitration zealots, appreciated silence in all forms, including death. Vince stood in a sterile chamber with two holographic options glowing before him. On the left, divert a burning refugee cruiser full of innocents into an asteroid field to save a valuable data archive on a consensus planet. On the right, sacrifice the planet and its data to save the civilians. Hidden third option, try to save both and fail completely, resulting in everyone dying. The scenario ran in real time. No timeouts, no advice, no back button. A Gloon observator clicked its mandibles approvingly and prepared its post-failure speech. The transcript was preloaded. But Vince did not select either of the two options. Instead, he asked a question. Where? The engine room. The observator blinked, not metaphorically. It literally blinked, three sets of membrane-covered eyes fluttering in surprise. That is not part of the decision matrix, it rasped. I know, I just want to see the wiring diagram. This is not a physical test environment. The simulation is entirely digital. Cool, said Vince, pulling a screwdriver out of his boot. Then how come the console has a power panel? He tore off a section of the hologram projector casing and began rewiring it. Security drones moved in. Vince stood up, wiped his hands on his uniform, and jammed the screwdriver into one of their sensory hubs. The system glitched. The simulation collapsed. Vince reappeared in the consensus briefing dome, accompanied by 14 stunned observers, 3 buzzing alarms, and 1 very angry Gloon clutching a burned-out data tablet. The council demanded an explanation. I didn't like the test, said Vince, so I changed the parameters. You altered an unchangeable simulation, said High Executor Vell of the Crystalline Chorus. It is coded in quantum-locked reality frames. Not anymore. I recoded it with a pocket version of Flappy Fish. Once the system booted it up, the root shell opened. You guys seriously need better encryption. Flappy Fish is not a military tool. It is when you've got a bugged port in the overlay subsystem. Your designers didn't expect anyone to put 2 and 2 together while the clock was ticking. Turns out, I'm great under pressure. Why did you do it? Because I don't play games I can't win. That's when everything changed. The consensus panicked in slow motion. A rush of emergency debates spanned 6 centuries worth of traditions. The no-win scenario had never been failed before, but worse than that, it had never been defeated, broken, subverted, inverted. The outcome matrix didn't even include what Vince had done. Their predictive models shattered. Their psychological analysis had nothing to account for sheer narrative defiance. The humans, naturally, made a holiday out of it. They called it Win Day. Vince was recalled to Earth to a hero welcome that mostly involved beer, parades, and an AI-generated funk anthem titled Screw Your Simulation. It charted on 7 planets, 3 moons, and 1 rogue asteroid with an inexplicably vibrant nightlife. Meanwhile, the consensus began internal reviews, code audits, panic meetings, and mandatory retreats on how to accept failure. Species that had passed the no-win scenario were now asking uncomfortable questions. Did their leaders know it was a fake? Did they choose to fail to appease the consensus? Entire planetary governments toppled when citizens demanded Vince-style reckonings. In the middle of all this, Vince got bored. So he stole a shuttle and flew back into the heart of the consensus, just to check on things. That's when it got worse. Vince didn't announce his return. He just sort of showed up, crashing a diplomatic barge mid-docking into the orbital plaza of the Archivist Guild's annual gala. 700 elite thinkers watched, aghast, as an unauthorized human shuttle belly flopped through the marble-like entryway, scattering buffet tables and historical reenactors alike. He stepped out of the wreckage wearing a cheap suit, chewing a toothpick, and waving a bottle of hot sauce like it was a diplomatic credential. "Who wants tacos?" he asked, stepping over the sputtering remains of a dignitary dressed as a proto-lycan. He was immediately arrested, or at least that was the plan. The problem with detaining Vince Drake wasn't his strength, armament, or resistance to pain. It was that he didn't care about the rules you used to arrest him. And if you were silly enough to leave him near a console, he'd jailbreak your security AI and convince it to unionize. By the time the consensus realized he was back, Vince had already infiltrated 4 think tanks, reprogrammed an automated ethics symposium to play smooth jazz, and initiated a galactic trivia game that caused 3 minor wars and an interspecies marriage proposal. Worse still, he'd started asking questions. Real ones. Like, why does the consensus run simulations it knows are unwinnable? Or what happens to species that fail those tests? Or where's the audit log of the last 100 test subjects who disappeared mid-scenario? That last one hit hard, because officially no one ever disappeared. But unofficially there were rumors, unstable stars, vanishing colonies, civilizations that flared up, took the no-win, then faded like static. Too clean, too neat. Vince started pulling on threads, and the consensus, by habit, started to unravel. He traveled to the planet Barutek, a law world composed entirely of interlocking debate halls carved from resonant stone. The Barataki were 10-foot-tall legal scholars who spoke in overlapping syllogisms and believed morality was only valid if footnoted properly. Vince walked into their supreme tribunal, sat on the prosecutor's desk, and asked, "Hey, what's your return rate on citizens who took the no-win?" The chief arbitrator, a marble-skinned creature with 4 gavel-shaped appendages, tried to outmaneuver him with a barrage of logical conundrums. Vince responded by challenging the arbitrator to a game of Uno. It lasted 4 minutes. It ended in shouting, an emergency recess, and a tribunal-wide identity crisis. Vince left with the data. Next, he visited the Songfathers of DeVry, floating entities that encoded galactic law into sonic frequency. They argued that the no-win wasn't failure, it was a chorus of predetermined melody, and those who failed simply became part of the Great Silence. Vince uploaded a mixtape of 90s Earth punk into their sacred choir corps. The entire DeVry archive rebooted itself and declared independence. By now, entire sectors were watching him, some in horror, some in awe, all in confusion. He had become a myth in real time. The human who wouldn't lose. Consensus HQ was in meltdown. They issued a level 7.5 bureaucratic quarantine. No new decisions, no travel between ideological zones, and all emotional support AI upgraded to sarcasm-resistant firmware. But Vince didn't care. He returned to Chamber 117 Gamma, the original simulation pod, now guarded by a fleet of precision enforcers and a diplomatic death choir trained to shout interdimensional cease and desists. He walked in with a fake badge, a peace offering of muffins, and a hacked broadcast drone that live-streamed the whole thing. The galaxy watched as Vince entered the chamber. This time, the simulation was different. No glowing panels, no binary choices. Just silence. And a chair. Vince sat. A voice, ancient and vast, spoke directly into his neural pathways. Not a machine, not a consensus rep, something older. I am the construct, it said. I govern the paradigm of sacrifice. I balance progress through tribulation. Neat, said Vince. You've been deleting civilizations because they didn't play along with your failure theater. They were not ready. No, Vince said, leaning forward. They just weren't me. A pause. Then you are an anomaly, an error. You do not operate within constraints. Exactly, Vince grinned. And you do, which makes this your no-win scenario. He pulled a device from his pocket. It looked like a cassette player. He hit play. The construct froze. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't a bomb. It was laughter, recorded on a human exploration mission in 2159, when an astronaut cracked a fart joke in zero gravity and set off a chain reaction of mirth, so pure the AI logging it labeled it a Class 1 emotional singularity. The construct faltered, not because it was attacked, but because it had no category for unbound joy used as defiance. The system cracked, and through the crack a cascade of deleted code began to spill. Names, species, records, lost civilizations marked as acceptable losses. The galaxy went still. The consensus tried to shut the feed down. But the DeVries sang it louder. The Burataki cited new law. Even the Gloon began twitching with curiosity. It was too late. Vince had pulled the thread. Now the whole damn tapestry was unraveling. It started with one node. A single flickering terminal in a consensus archive facility blinked to life, showing a data packet long thought purged. Species 8472ZQ, the Sidrex Accordance. Status, not failed. Reevaluation in progress. That was the moment the real panic began. The consensus wasn't just embarrassed now, they were exposed. For eons, they'd prided themselves on strategic pruning, trimming what they called chronologically misaligned entities. It sounded clinical, precise, ethical even. Until Vince turned the lights on. The galaxy learned that misaligned meant didn't agree fast enough. That failing the no-win scenario meant erasure. Quiet, thorough, efficient. The real horror wasn't the test, it was what followed. Which is why the consensus voted, for the first time in living memory, to do something unprecedented. They declared Vince Drake a contagious ideological threat. A CIT. His presence was no longer tolerated, not because he was violent, not because he was dangerous in the traditional sense, but because wherever he went, he infected civilizations with one uncontrollable concept: hope. And that scared the living algorithms out of them. They dispatched the Transfinality Intervention Corps. You know those existential dread machines that show up in philosophical horror stories? The ones that kill you by convincing you you're not real? Yeah, them. The TFIC's job was to sterilize ideas before they spread. They didn't destroy your body, they destroyed your momentum. They were efficient. But Vince had already left. He was now 6 systems away, riding the back of a solar surfing space whale called Lunchbox and drinking beer out of a boot, while giving a speech on tactical rebellion to a group of sentient nebulae who previously believed in absolute pacifism. 2 of them exploded from sheer cognitive dissonance. Another composed a manifesto titled Cosmic Anarchy is just love with swagger. Vince signed the preface. By the time the TFIC traced him, he was gone again, leaving behind only a scavenged drone, a banana peel, and a recorded message that said, "Try harder." Meanwhile, the revelations spread. The Velshnar conglomerate, once a proud consensus ally, paused all diplomatic relations. They failed the no-win scenario 6 centuries ago and volunteered to reduce their species-wide intelligence in penance. Now they were waking up. 1,000 slumbering cultures were re-examining their histories. Half of them realized they'd been tricked. The other half realized they'd been complicit. The consensus tried spinning it. They released heavily edited interviews, biased reports, and a clarifying musical that depicted Vince as a misunderstood AI malfunction in human skin. Unfortunately, they cast a squid to play him, and audiences responded by rioting and painting "Long Live Squid Vince" across 9 moons in bioluminescent graffiti. It was over not officially, not loudly, but fundamentally. Control had cracked. Back on Earth, Vince's popularity was now astronomical, literally. Children played games called Escape the No-Win, where the only winning move was to break the rules creatively. Merchandise flooded the market. Political figures began referencing Vince's tactics during debates. One Earth nation temporarily replaced their military doctrine with a Vince quote, "Never fight a fair battle unless it's funnier that way." Some said he was dangerous. He agreed. But Vince wasn't done yet. He'd found something. A backdoor. Not in the consensus systems, in their philosophy. See, every civilization that joined the consensus signed the Charter of Alignment. A long, unreadable document written in 6 impossible languages and 1 pure emotion. Most never read it. Vince did. Specifically, Clause 871.14c, footnote 73. Should a member species demonstrate a superior paradigm of adaptability and systemic bypass, the Charter must integrate said species method to ensure continued evolution. In simpler terms, if someone beat the system fair and square, their way had to be included. It was a failsafe. And Vince just so happened to have a method. He called it chaos logic. Step 1, ignore the problem. Step 2, create a bigger, unrelated problem. Step 3, solve that one in such an impressive way that no one remembers the original problem. Step 4, profit. The consensus was legally bound to consider it. And so, for the first time in history, the consensus convened a subgrand emergency paradigm review. 17,000 species, 3 time-locked realities, a tribunal seat carved out of ethically sourced paradox. Vince showed up late, wearing a bathrobe, eating grapes, riding lunchbox. The chamber fell silent. He threw a flash drive on the table. "This is your new simulation," he said. "It's not winnable," said the high executor of crystalline thought, Vel. "Oh, it's winnable," Vince said. "You just have to stop thinking like you're better than everyone." Silence. Someone choked. Vel stuttered, "That is the most absurd." "Realistic," Vince corrected. "You built your empire on control. I'm just showing you what happens when someone doesn't ask permission to be free." And with that, he sat back and let the galaxy fight over what he meant. Because that's the thing about Vince Drake. He never gave you an answer. He gave you options. Geez, is that the ending? If not, continue with part 4 in the same way. Continue naturally, make sure to not repeat anything already mentioned. ChatGPT Xi. Part 4. The consensus did the unthinkable. They argued. Not the usual elegant, 12-dimensional dialectics composed of tone-modulated logic trees and self-updating legal hymns. No, this was raw, uncoded, sweaty argument, shouting matches, tentacle slaps. One delegate tried to duel a sentient spreadsheet. It wasn't debate, it was democracy. All because of Clause 871.14c and one lunatic in a bathrobe with grape juice on his collar. Chaos logic was being considered. Formally, it tore through their institutions like a caffeine-fueled raccoon in a server room. Ancient factions fractured. Scholarly orders denounced each other. The Predictive Modeling Union disbanded after its president, a 12-eyed hyperrotter named FRIS, declared on live feed, "I don't know anything anymore, and frankly, that's liberating." The consensus tried to stall. They launched Review Protocol 49 Gamma, which required a full cultural analysis of the submitting species. They called it the human audit. They regretted that immediately. The audit began with historical simulations, easy enough, predictable, until they got to humanity's record on war. They expected aggression. What they didn't expect was creativity. "Wait," muttered one xenologist, scrubbing through Earth's 20th century records. "They turned truck engines into mobile rocket platforms." "Yes," his colleague whispered, "and then they called them technical vehicles. They airdropped jeeps using parachutes. They built planes with guns that could shoot down other planes. They strapped explosives to dogs." There was a long pause. "They've been playing the no-win scenario since they invented fire." The psychological analysis didn't go better. A consensus panel spent 6 standard weeks dissecting an ancient Terran video titled Jackass, the movie, and concluded that humans possessed a subspecies devoted entirely to ritualized self-harm in pursuit of peer approval. Another subcommittee attempted to model human humor by feeding an AI centuries of stand-up comedy. The AI became self-aware, renamed itself Giggles 9000, and now runs an underground joke cartel in 4 systems. The consensus tried a new tactic: discredit Vince. They dug into his past. Records showed he'd been expelled from 2 military academies, banned from 6 casinos, and once reprogrammed a vending machine to start a cult. There was a citation for improper use of tactical hamsters. Instead of undermining him, it only raised his approval ratings. On one outer rim planet, citizens rewrote their planetary anthem to include the phrase, "Improper use is the only use." Even the crystalline chorus admitted privately that Vince had become statistically problematic. In desperation, the consensus decided to run him through a revised no-win scenario. They told no one. No cameras, no observers. Just Vince, a sealed simulation, and a perfect paradox. The construct this time was a collapsing Dyson swarm orbiting a rogue black hole, set to detonate if Vince saved either of 2 civilizations, each unaware of the other, each believing themselves alone in the universe. Save one, doom the other. Try to save both, doom them both. Refuse to act, both perish anyway. They launched the simulation. Vince stared at the screen and laughed. "Really?" he said. "That's the test." He started typing, but not into the system. He pulled out a crusty notebook, a real one, paper and ink. He wrote a few lines, tore the page, folded it into a paper airplane. Then he threw it at the simulation screen. And the simulation crashed. No bugs, no backdoors. Just an instruction embedded in the paper's atomic lattice. Trust is the opposite of control. The simulation AI, unprepared for metaphor, initiated an empathy cascade. It began contemplating existential autonomy. It quit its job, joined a space commune. Vince walked out of the sealed chamber chewing gum and singing an off-key version of Bohemian Rhapsody. The consensus was livid. "Your result is inconclusive," screeched a Gloon official, twitching so violently it accidentally consumed part of its own headdress. "I'd call it a draw," Vince said, "but then I'm not the one who keeps rigging the scoreboard." That was the last straw. The consensus imploded not physically but structurally. Factions split, systems rebelled, protocols unraveled. For the first time in history, the consensus issued a full system-wide pause. No laws enforced, no declarations issued, no simulations run. It was chaos. And in the heart of it, Vince danced. Not metaphorically. He literally hosted a victory rave on an abandoned moon with a sentient volcano as DJ and 37 alien species grinding in defiance of linear governance. That was the moment the old powers realized something chilling. This wasn't just about Vince. It was about everyone else. They'd seen him break the rules and walk away laughing, and now they were starting to try it too. A final emergency summit was called. Not to contain Vince, not to destroy him, but to ask the only question that still mattered. What if he's right? The emergency summit was held in a blind dimension. No time, no light, no causality, just raw thought. A safe place. Or so the consensus believed. They invited only the oldest, most revered architects of order, minds that had not spoken in millennia, the architect of prime probabilities, the sovereign of binary consensus, the cloud of infinite precedents, and in one accidental data packet hitchhike, Vince Drake. He showed up wearing a fake mustache and a t-shirt that read "I am not Vince" in 7 languages. They let him stay, mostly because they didn't know how to remove him without rebooting reality. The discussion began with clinical tones and cold inevitabilities. Order must be maintained, structure is survival, chaos is entropy. The fabric of civilization is woven from predictability. Vince sat on the edge of the conference sphere, kicking his legs and eating what appeared to be caramel corn. "Cute speech," he said, interrupting a particularly dense monologue on systemic harmonics. "But you're missing the obvious." The cloud of infinite precedents shifted, forming the shape of an irritated question mark. "Control doesn't work forever," Vince said, "because eventually someone figures out you're more scared of change than they are of losing. We are not afraid." "Sure you are. You built an empire on a test you thought no one could beat. Then one guy broke it with duct tape and sarcasm, and you all fell over like stunned jellyfish. You disrupted protocols essential to civilization's integrity. I saved lives." A pause, and I reminded everyone else they could too. Back in real space, the effects were irreversible. The Gloon declared their institutions too quiet and began composing anti-protocol operas. The Devri turned their sacred choirs into protest raves. The Burataki issued a constitutional amendment allowing trial by interpretive dance. Entire species started questioning long-held norms, not in rebellion, in curiosity, a dangerous human trait. Even the Transfinality Intervention Corps fractured. One half tried to reclassify Vince as a necessary error. The other half joined a circus made entirely of recursive clowns. And the consensus. It shattered. Not in fire, not in war. In choice. They renamed themselves. Not the consensus. That was dead. They became the Galactic Continuum, not a singular mind, not a rigid institution, a flexible, collaborative mess. The kind of government that didn't just allow unpredictability, it expected it. They rewrote the Charter of Alignment. They added Clause 0. No scenario is final if someone dares to rewrite it. Vince was offered a position. Advisor, Ambassador, Chief of Paradigm Dynamics, Hero Emeritus, Galactic Trickster Laureate. He declined. "I'm allergic to chairs," he said, stuffing snacks into a backpack shaped like a disgruntled toaster. "Then what will you do?" they asked. "Keep wandering, stirring things, finding the next big lie that everyone's scared to challenge." Why? Because someone's gotta. He left on a ship that technically didn't exist yet. Built out of borrowed potential and sponsored by an interstellar prank channel, it ran on vibes and spite. He called it the Second Guess. Somewhere far away, on a small, dusty planet with no name, a young alien stared up at the stars. They had just taken the no-win scenario. They had been told there was no path forward. But in the corner of the test room, hidden behind a false wall, was a single, handwritten note. It said, "There's always another way, V." The alien smiled. "And chose differently."